Welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about an overview of good clinical practice and how we really need to think beyond just the regulations, how we would apply it and implement it. So who needs to be engaged, when do they need to be engaged, what needs to be in place. So today we're going to talk about the elements of a functional quality system, particularly at the site level, because that's where all of these regulations come into play. Examine recent trends in noncompliance, so some of the things that the FDA is seeing. And unfortunately, they're similar to what we see in other regulatory agencies. Discuss the role of SOPs in GCP, who is required to have standard operating procedures or written procedures, and for whom are they suggested. Look at the differences between the legal and procedural elements of GCP. What do the regulations say versus what are we actually doing to apply and implement those? And we'll talk about some of the key differences between pharmaceutical, device, and biologics and the regulations and guidelines that govern those. So to think about the common elements of GCP, you may or may not be familiar with these, but 21 CFR Part 11, electronic records and signatures, information used in clinical trials. And I have that in parentheses because we still don't always think of it as something that is part of what we do. Some folks think that because the FDA is not particularly or directly calling us out to Part 11, they're not interested in this. But I assure you the Federal Register believes that it has been finalized, and the FDA has said, while we may not cite you to 21 CFR Part 11, we will cite you for failing to maintain adequate and accurate records. And we've actually seen warning letters go out to investigators. Dr. Nemechek, for example, got a warning letter for not having disaster recovery and backup for his electronic systems at his clinic while he was conducting research. So very much a part of what we do, looking at the integrity of those records, those signatures, making sure that we can rely on that information that's being produced. And the FDA has guidance on electronic records, it has guidance on electronic source, has guidance on validation, and most recently finalized their guidance on electronic health records used in clinical research. 21 CFR Part 50. So this is information on human research protections. This is through the document and process of informed consent. Some of the most recent changes we've seen to this, which we're still struggling with to get people to comply, are the requirements for those applicable studies. If they are required to be registered on clinicaltrials.gov, we need to make sure that this information is included in the informed consent document. We also have information on 21 CFR Part 54. So this is information on financial disclosure. It is one quantifiable way for assessing the potential for conflict of interest or bias in clinical research. So we gather this information from our investigators and sub-investigators prior to that study starting, during the course of the study if there are any changes that could impact on that stock, equity interest, significant payments of other sorts, and then a year after that study ends. Unfortunately, we have seen this happen recently where the FDA, as we will talk about here in a moment, is not the only agency that's interested in what we are doing. So gathering financial disclosure information is critical. It should be a trigger for release of your investigational product in terms of we should have these essential documents in place prior to releasing that product. 21 CFR 56. This is the composition and function of institutional review boards. Historically, those have been under the purview, if you will, of a clinical investigator. If we needed to go look at a central IRB, we would go through that investigator because they were truly institutional review boards. But as we know over the last many years, we have seen that more and more often they are becoming vendors for the sponsors. So one of the expectations certainly is if we are working with IRBs, we are making sure that they are comprised appropriately, that they're registered appropriately. And there are two different types of registration. So each of these things, you might have been to investigator meetings where these elements were flashed on a slide and you were told about these regulations. But our job is to really think about what do these regulations require? Going back to 21 CFR 54, it is not enough to just get that financial disclosure form. If there is anything that has been disclosed, we're required to mitigate and manage that potential for bias. 21 CFR 56, as I mentioned, your IRBs need to be registered with OHRP. We need to check that registration. What type of registration is it? Is it OHRP type only, meaning that they are gathering or applying 45 CFR 46 or the common rule to their review and approval and oversight of that research? Or is it 21 CFR 56? So there's OHRP type only and OHRP FDA type. Are they applying 21 CFR 56 as is required on the back of our 1571s, our INDs, and our 1572s as Statement of the Investigator?